Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The sound of Alexandra Wells' heels echoed through the corridors of Wells Technologies as she marched towards the meeting room, her determined expression reflecting on the glass walls of the 47th floor of the imposing skyscraper in Seattle. Employees looked away, trying to avoid the hurricane that their CEO had become in recent weeks. At 32, Alexandra had built a technology empire, but at that moment she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Nathan Carter, innovation director, in her right-hand man for 5 years, was sitting at the meeting table reviewing documents with the same dedication that had characterized him since he joined the company. His dark blue eyes were fixed on Alexandra as soon as she burst through the door, followed by 2 security guards and Richard Morrison, the new CFO she had hired just 3 months ago. "Nathan, this meeting will be brief," Alexandra announced, her voice controlled. "But I see evidence has been found that you have been sharing confidential information with our Silicon Valley competitors." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan slowly stood up, his 6 feet 2 inches height, imposing a presence that made the security guards step forward. "Alex, do you really believe this?" His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed deep hurt. "I got the reports right here," Richard intervened, sliding a folder across the table. "Suspicious transfers, unrecorded meetings, encrypted emails." Alexandra. Nathan ignored Richard, focusing entirely on the woman who, until weeks ago, he considered not only his business partner, but someone for whom he had increasingly deep feelings. "You've known me for 5 years. We built this company together. How can you give credence to these accusations without even giving me a chance to defend myself?" The CEO of Wells Technologies adjusted her posture, ignoring the tightness in her chest as she saw the pain in Nathan's eyes. "The evidence is conclusive. You are fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." Nathan remained motionless for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on Alexandra, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. Finally, a sad smile formed on his lips. "You'll regret this, Alex, not for the betrayal you think I committed, but for letting your pride cloud your judgment." The security guards approached, but Nathan was already heading for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "When you realize your mistake, it may be too late." In the months that followed, Alexandra tried to ignore the void left by Nathan's absence, focusing obsessively on her work. Wells Technologies continued its meteoric rise for a while, but something had changed. The meetings had lost that creative energy that Nathan always brought. The innovative projects he led began to stagnate. Richard Morrison was proving increasingly authoritarian in his financial decisions, alienating important partners and alienating key employees. Alexandra began to notice discrepancies in the reports, but when she finally decided to investigate further, she discovered a web of manipulations and deviations that pointed directly at Richard. 18 months after Nathan's departure, Wells Technologies was on the verge of collapse. Shares were plummeting, investors were withdrawing their support, and a series of scandals threatened to destroy everything Alexandra had built. Richard had disappeared, taking millions in embezzled funds with him. Sitting in her office on a rainy Seattle evening, Alexandra looked out at the city through the windows of the building that now seemed more like a prison than a symbol of success. Her cell phone vibrated with a notification. Nathan Carter had just launched his own technology company in San Francisco with an initial valuation that made Wells Technologies look like a startup. The photo of him in the article showed a changed man, stronger, more confident, with a determined glint in his eyes that she knew so well. The text mentioned revolutionary innovations and strategic partnerships with the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Alexandra closed her eyes, remembering his last words on that fateful day. Now she understood. Richard had orchestrated the whole thing, planting false evidence to throw off Nathan, the only one who could have stopped his elaborate fraud. With trembling hands, Alexandra reached for her personal phone, the one she hadn't used for almost 2 years. Nathan's number was still there, untouched. Her finger hovered over the call button, while thousands of thoughts raced through her mind. How could she ask for forgiveness from someone she had betrayed so deeply? How to admit that her pride and stubbornness had cost her not only her company, but also the person who mattered most in her life? What Alexandra didn't know was that in San Francisco, Nathan was looking at a photo of her in his own office. Next to him on the desk was a detailed folder with all the evidence of his innocence and Richard Morrison's guilt. For 2 years, he had meticulously constructed not only his new company, but also a plan to save Wells Technologies and, perhaps if fate permitted, win back the heart of the woman He had never stopped loving the rain continued to fall in Seattle, as two hearts separated by miles and pride began to find their way back to each other, even if they still didn't know how their story would end. Nathan watched the city of San Francisco through the windows of his new office at Infinity Tech, the empire he had painstakingly built over the last 2 years. The Californian evening sun painted the sky in shades of orange, contrasting with the deep blue of the bay. On his desk, a screen displayed the latest news about Wells Technologies, and each negative headline was like a small victory in his revenge plan, or so he tried to convince himself. "Mr. Carter, the development team is ready for the presentation of Project Phoenix," announced Mia Chan, his executive assistant, interrupting his thoughts. Project Phoenix was ironically appropriate. Like the mythological bird, Nathan had risen from the ashes of his destroyed career, but unlike Wells Technologies, which continued its downward spiral, Infinity Tech was revolutionizing the market with innovations he had kept to himself for years. Rachel sent over the latest financial reports from Wells. Mia continued sliding a folder across her desk. Rachel Torres, the former Wells Technologies employee who had followed Nathan, was now his CFO and a key part of his plan. The figures were even worse than he had expected. Wells Technology shares had fallen 68% in the last quarter, and rumors of bankruptcy were beginning to circulate in financial circles. Nathan felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not satisfaction, as it should have been, but worry. Even after everything, he couldn't take joy in Alexandra's suffering. "Schedule a meeting with the board for tomorrow," Nathan instructed, standing up, "and prepare the Project Redemption documents." Project Redemption was his best-kept secret, a meticulously crafted plan to save Wells Technologies from bankruptcy, but on his terms. For 2 years, he had collected evidence against Richard Morrison, tracked every penny embezzled, and built a support network with strategic investors. In the conference room, the presentation of Project Phoenix went perfectly. The new artificial intelligence technology they had developed not only surpassed anything on the market, but also incorporated elements that he and Alexandra had dreamed up together during endless nights of work at Wells Technologies. After the meeting, Nathan found himself alone in his office again, this time staring at a photo on his phone. Alexandra at a charity event 6 months ago, looking exhausted, but still determined. His fingers hesitated over her number, which he still knew by heart. "Not yet," he muttered to himself. The timing had to be perfect in Seattle. At that very moment, Alexandra was facing her own battle. An emergency meeting with shareholders had turned into an informal tribunal where her every decision was questioned and criticized. The irony didn't escape her. The same people who had applauded Nathan's resignation now blamed her for his absence. "Ms. Wells," one of the older shareholders spoke up, "we need to consider all options, including your replacement as CEO." Alexandra kept her composure, but inside, she was devastated. Everything her father had built, everything she had expanded, was crumbling. Because of a rash decision based on lies. That night, alone in her apartment overlooking the Space Needle, Alexandra did something she hadn't done for months. She looked Nathan up on the internet. The photos of him at the last technology conference in Silicon Valley showed a changed man. His smile, once warm and open, now carried a hint of mystery. His eyes, always expressive, hid secrets that she would give anything to discover. An anonymous email arrived in her inbox containing documents that proved Nathan's innocence and Richard Morrison's guilt. The sender was unknown, but the message was clear: sometimes pride costs us more than we can afford. Nathan, looking at the email trace on his computer, knew that Alexandra was online, probably reading the evidence at that very moment. It was just the first step in his plan, a plan that wasn't aimed at destroying her as many would expect, but it's saving her, because despite the betrayal, the 2 years of bitterness and loneliness, he had never been able to stop loving her. In his office in San Francisco, Nathan opened a locked drawer and took out a small object, an engagement ring he had bought 2 weeks before his resignation. It was a constant reminder of what could have been, and perhaps what could still be. Phase 1 complete, Rachel announced, entering her office. "The investors are ready for the takeover bid." Nathan nodded, putting the ring away. The next move would be decisive, a merger proposal that would bring him and Alexandra face to face. For the first time in 2 years, the question was no longer whether she would accept his help, but when she would realize that even after everything, he was still the only one who could and wanted to save her. The merger proposal arrived on Alexandra's desk on a rainy Thursday, carried by a courier from Infinity Tech. The sleek, minimalist logo of Nathan's company shone on the letterhead, making her heart race. The conditions were surprisingly fair. Wells Technologies would retain its operational autonomy, But under the financial and technological protection of Infinity Tech, it's a trap, declared Marcus Peterson, the new legal advisor analyzing the documents. Carter wants to swallow us up and then destroy everything that's left. Alexandra remained silent, her fingers unconsciously tracing Nathan's signature on the document, the proof of his innocence received days before still weighed heavily on her conscience. Arranged the meeting, she finally decided on neutral ground: 3 days. Later, Alexandra found herself on the 42nd floor of the Four Seasons in Denver, Colorado. The choice of location was no coincidence. It was there that she and Nathan had closed their first major contract together 5 years ago. The private restaurant offered a spectacular view of the Rocky Mountains, but she barely noticed the scenery. Nathan arrived punctually at 7 p.m., wearing a navy blue suit that accentuated his eyes. Alexandra felt the air escape from her lungs. 2 years had done him good. He was stronger, more resolute, but his eyes still carried that intensity that always disconcerted her. Alexandra. He greeted her formally, using her full name for the first time in years. The sound caused her to shiver involuntarily. Nathan, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The first few minutes were filled with technical discussions about the merger. Nathan presented projections, market strategies, and recovery plans that demonstrated an intimate knowledge of Wells Technologies' problems. It was as if he had never left. Why are you doing this? Alexandra finally asked, interrupting an explanation of financial restructuring. After everything that's happened, Nathan paused, placing the documents on the table. Did you receive the evidence about Morrison? Yes, she admitted, guilt evident in her voice. Nathan, No, he interrupted her gently. Not yet. First, we need to save your company. Then his eyes met hers. Then we'll have time for all the conversations we need to have. Dinner continued, and gradually the initial tension gave way to a cautious familiarity. It was impossible to deny the chemistry that still existed between them, the way they completed each other's sentences, how their thoughts followed the same strategic paths. There's one condition that's not in the documents, Nathan announced when dessert arrived. I want you to come to San Francisco next week. I need to show you something at Infinity Tech. Alexandra hesitated. Going into his territory meant giving up the last vestige of control she still had in the situation. Why? Because some truths need to be seen, not just heard, he replied enigmatically. Before she could reply, her phone vibrated with an urgent notification. Wells Technology shares had plummeted another 15%, following a leak about problems with their new virtual reality project. That shouldn't have happened. She muttered, pale. The reports were confidential. No, they shouldn't have been. Nathan agreed, his face hardening. Morrison still has allies within the company. That's why we need to act quickly. At that moment, Alexandra realized that she had no choice. Nathan wasn't just her only hope of salvation, he was the only one she could really trust. I'll be in San Francisco on Monday. She conceded. A small smile formed on Nathan's lips, the first of the evening that reached his eyes. I'll send a car to pick you up at the airport. When they said goodbye, the touch of their hands was brief but charged with electricity. Alexandra watched Nathan leave, his silhouette disappearing into the elevator, and allowed herself to admit what her heart already knew. She had never gotten over her feelings for him. Back in her hotel room, Alexandra found a small envelope that had been slid under her door. Inside was an old photo of the two of them taken during the opening of Wells Technologies. On the back, written by hand, was a message that made her eyes fill with tears. Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters. See you Monday, Alex. In San Francisco, Nathan entered his office at Infinity Tech and activated a holographic screen. On it, dozens of documents and connections revealed a conspiracy much bigger than Alexandra had imagined. Richard Morrison was just one piece of a more complex puzzle, and the full truth could change everything. Phase 2 completed. He muttered to himself, his eyes fixed on the photo of Alexandra on his desk. The plan was in motion, but for the first time in 2 years, Nathan wasn't sure if revenge was still the main goal. Maybe, just maybe, redemption was a better path for both of them. The California morning sun bathed the glass and steel facade of Infinity Tech as Alexandra stepped out of the limousine sent by Nathan. The building, an architectural masterpiece in the heart of San Francisco, seemed to mock Wells Technologies' current situation with its imposing modernity. Welcome to Infinity Tech. Ms. Wells, a young Asian woman, greeted her in the lobby. I'm Mia Chen, Mr. Carter's executive assistant. Please come with me. During the ride in the panoramic elevator, Alexandra watched the city unfold below, trying to ignore the nervousness growing in her stomach. The last 48 hours since dinner in Denver had been a whirlwind of emotions and resurfaced memories. Nathan's office occupied the entire top floor. Upon entering, Alexandra was immediately struck by the familiarity of the environment, the arrangement of the furniture, the colors on the walls, even the aroma of premium coffee in the air were reminiscent of the early days of Wells Technologies when she and Nathan spent entire evenings planning for the future. "You've recreated our old office," she observed, her voice betraying the emotion she was trying to contain. "With a few improvements," Nathan replied, emerging from an adjacent room. "Come on, there's something I need to show you." He led her to a high-tech conference room where holograms filled the room with a gesture. Nathan activated a presentation that made Alexandra freeze. They were emails, bank transfers, and documents that revealed a conspiracy much bigger than she had imagined. "Richard Morrison didn't act alone," Nathan explained, his voice deep. "He was part of a group of investors who had been trying to take control of Wells Technologies for years. My resignation was just the first step." The hologram showed connections between Morrison and 3 members of the current Wells Technologies board. Alexandra felt her blood run cold as she recognized names that were still with the company, people she trusted. "How did you find out all this?" she asked, trying to process the information. 2 years is enough time to put a lot of pieces together," Nathan replied, stepping closer. "But the most important thing is not how I found out, but why I kept this information until now." Alexandra turned to face him, aware of the closeness between them. "Why?" "Because I needed to make sure you were ready to see the full truth," he replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "Not just about Morrison, but about us." At that moment, Rachel Torres entered the room with more documents, interrupting the tense moment. "The merger contracts are ready for review, and the investors have confirmed their attendance at this afternoon's meeting." The morning passed in a series of strategic meetings. Alexandra watched in amazement as Nathan built a company that not only rivaled Wells Technologies at its peak, but surpassed it in many ways. Every innovation, every optimized process bore traces of the work they had done together over lunch served on the rooftop overlooking the bay. Alexandra finally found the courage to broach the subject that had been consuming her. "Why are you really helping me, Nathan? You could have just let me sink." Nathan placed his glass of water on the table thoughtfully. "Do you believe in second chances, Alex? After everything I've found out, I don't know if I deserve one." "It's not about deserving it," he replied, reaching for her hand on the table. "It's about choosing a different path when we realize our mistakes." His touch sent an electric current through her body, awakening memories of happier times. Before she could respond, an alarm sounded on their phones. Simultaneously, Wells Technologies shares had been suspended on the stock exchange after yet another scandal leaked to the press. "They're speeding up the process," Nathan muttered, already typing commands into his tablet. "We need to act now." The next few moments were a whirlwind of activity. Rachel and Mia coordinated teams, preparing documents and organizing emergency conferences. Alexandra watched in amazement as Infinity Tech mobilized to save their company, following a plan that Nathan seemed to have prepared for exactly this moment. In the late afternoon, exhausted but hopeful, Alexandra found herself alone again with Nathan in his office. The sun was setting over the bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Tomorrow we'll announce the merger," Nathan declared, looking out over the city. "But first, there's something you need to know." He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a small velvet box. Alexandra's heart stopped as she recognized what it was. "I bought this 2 weeks before that day," he revealed, opening the box to show a delicate engagement ring. "Not to pressure you or change anything now, but so that you would fully understand what was at stake." "What still is?" Alexandra felt tears forming in her eyes, finally understanding the true extent of the damage she had caused. It wasn't just a company she had put at risk, but an entire future that could have been. "Nathan, she began, but he gently interrupted her. "Not today," he said softly, putting the ring away. "First, we're going to save your company. Then when everything is sorted out, we'll have all the time in the world to rebuild what was broken if you want." The proposal hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, Alexandra realized that she was facing a choice that would define not only the future of Wells Technologies, but also her own destiny. Dawn found Alexandra in her hotel room in San Francisco, reviewing the stack of documents Nathan had shared. Each page revealed a new layer of the conspiracy that had destroyed not only her confidence, but almost ruined everything she and her father had built. Her phone vibrated with a message from Nathan. "Emergency meeting in 30 minutes. We've discovered something." When Alexandra arrived at Infinity Tech, the atmosphere was electrically charged. Rachel Torres and a team of analysts occupied the crisis room, screens displaying graphs and documents on every wall. "We've found the pattern," Nathan announced as soon as she entered. "Morrison isn't just leaking information, He's manipulating the market. The last 3 scandals have been timed perfectly to coincide with big share movements. And that's not all, Rachel interjected. Projecting new documents, we discovered transfers linking Morrison to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The same company has connections to Marcus Peterson. Alexandra felt her blood run cold. Marcus Peterson, her current legal advisor, was one of the last people she still trusted at Wells Technologies. Are you sure? Absolutely, Nathan confirms, stepping closer to her. And there's more. Peterson is planning an extraordinary meeting for this afternoon in Seattle. He's going to try to force a vote on his removal from office. The world seemed to spin around Alexandra. I need to go back to Seattle now. No, Nathan said firmly, taking her arm. That's exactly what they want. If you show up at that meeting without proper legal protection, they'll have everything they need to put you away for good. So what's the plan? She asked, aware of the warmth of his hand on her arm. Nathan smiled, that smile she knew so well, which meant he already had everything planned. Rachel, show her the Phoenix Project. The next few hours were a storm of activity. Project Phoenix, it transpired, was much more than a simple corporate merger. It was a complete re-engineering of both companies, combining the best of Wells Technologies with the innovations of Infinity Tech. The official announcement will be made via video conference. During the meeting, Nathan explained, our lawyers have already prepared all the documentation. The moment Peterson tries his hand, we'll reveal everything, the evidence against him. Morrison and the others involved. Alexandra watched in amazement as each piece fitted together perfectly. Had you been planning this for 2 years? No, Nathan replied softly. I planned for 2 years how to save Wells Technologies. The rest developed as I realized I couldn't hate you no matter how hard I tried. The moment was interrupted by Mia announcing that the video conference was ready to begin. On the main screen, the Wells Technologies meeting room in Seattle was beginning to fill up with shareholders and board members. Are you ready? Nathan asked, offering his hand to Alexandra. She entwined her fingers in his, feeling a wave of confidence wash over her. I am now. The meeting began exactly as Nathan had predicted. Marcus Peterson, confident in his apparent victory, began his calculated attack on Alexandra. But before he could finish his speech, the screens in the meeting room were taken over by documents and evidence that exposed the entire conspiracy. Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan's voice echoed through the room. Before you make any decisions today, we suggest you examine this evidence carefully. The chaos that followed was controlled and meticulously orchestrated while Peterson and his allies desperately tried to explain the evidence presented. Alexandra and Nathan announced the merger between the companies, presenting a recovery plan that made both companies' shares skyrocket instantly. Hours later, with Peterson and his accomplices being escorted by federal agents, Alexandra found herself alone again with Nathan in his office. How did you know? She asked. How did you know they would try something today? Nathan moved closer to the window, watching the city lights that were beginning to glow in the twilight. Because that's what I would have done if my goal was to destroy someone. He turned to face her. But my goal has always been to save you, even when you didn't know you needed saving. Alexandra felt tears forming in her eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Nathan, not after everything I've done. It's not about deserving it, he replied, repeating his words from the day before. It's about choosing a different path. He reached for something on his desk, the ring he had shown her. And maybe if you're willing, we can choose that path together. The silence that followed was filled with 2 years of unspoken words, repressed feelings, and renewed hope. The city continued to glow outside, a silent witness to a moment that could change everything or start all over again. The sun was setting on San Francisco when Alexandra finally gave her answer to the ring Nathan was holding. But before she could utter the words she had been holding back for so long, an alert on her phone broke the moment the press had found out about Peterson and Morrison's arrest. We need to get ahead of the story, Nathan declared reluctantly, putting the ring away. As Rachel set up the press conference, yet everything is ready in the main auditorium, Mia replied, hurrying into the room. The main media arrived in 20 minutes. Alexandra felt the weight of responsibility returned to her shoulders. The merger between Wells Technologies and Infinity Tech would be the biggest event in Silicon Valley that year, but there was something more important at stake: her personal and professional redemption. Before the press conference, Nathan touched her arm gently. There's something you need to see. He led her down an unfamiliar corridor. Using his fingerprint to access a restricted area of the building, the room they entered was unlike anything Alexandra had seen before. Walls covered in holographic screens showed lines of code and projects in development. This is the real Phoenix Project, Nathan revealed. Not just a corporate merger, but something we developed together without knowing it. Alexandra stared in amazement. At the screens, the codes were familiar. They were the basis of projects she had developed at Wells. Technologies now expanded and perfected by Nathan's team. Did you continue our work? Every line of code you wrote, every idea we shared, Nathan explained, activating more displays. I kept alive. I couldn't let go of our dreams, even when everything fell apart. The technology unfolding before them was revolutionary, a perfect combination of Wells Technologies' innovations and Infinity Tech's advances. It was as if the two companies should never have been separated, as well as their leaders, Ms. Wells. Mr. Carter, Mia interrupted respectfully. The press is waiting. The auditorium was packed when they entered. Flashes went off incessantly as Nathan and Alexandra took their seats at the head table. Rachel Torres flanked them, prepared with all the necessary documents. Good evening. Nathan began, his firm voice echoing through the room. Today we're not just announcing a corporate merger, we're righting a wrong from the past and building a future that should always have existed. Alexandra watched in amazement as he conducted the press conference, answering difficult questions with a mixture of honesty and diplomacy that she had forgotten he possessed. When it was his turn to speak, she felt his hand discreetly touch hers under the table, conveying strength. Wells Technologies and Infinity Tech have always shared the same DNA, she declared, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. Today, we're not just bringing companies together, we're bringing together a vision that should never have been separated. The questions from the press were relentless, but each answer revealed more layers of the truth that Nathan had protected for so long. The story of betrayal and redemption captured the public's imagination, turning what could have been a corporate scandal into a narrative of overcoming. Hours later, exhausted but victorious, they met again in Nathan's office. The city glowed below, seemingly oblivious to the transformation that had just taken place in its corporate towers. You never let me answer. Alexandra broke the silence, turning to face him. Nathan watched her with that intensity that always made her shiver inside. About the ring, she replied, taking a step towards him. You said we could choose a new path together. The air between them became charged with electricity. Nathan reached for the ring in his pocket, but Alexandra gently held his hand, stopping him. First, I need you to know something, she continued. During these 2 years, there hasn't been a day when I haven't regretted that decision, not just for what I did to the company, but for what I did to us. Alex. No, let me finish, she insisted softly. You didn't just save Wells Technologies, you saved me. And if there's still a chance, if you still want to build that future we planned. Nathan didn't let her finish. With one smooth movement, he eliminated the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that carried 2 years of longing, regret, and above all, unwavering love. When they parted, they were both smiling through unshed tears. Nathan finally removed the ring, and this time Alexandra didn't stop him, so he smiled. That smile she loved so much. Is that a yes? Her answer was interrupted by an alert on their phones. Company shares had soared after the press conference, setting new records. But for the first time in a long time, neither Alexandra nor Nathan cared about numbers or graphs. On the horizon, the lights of San Francisco continued to shine, silently witnessing the beginning of a new story, one that promised to be even more extraordinary than the last news of the merger between Wells Technologies and Infinity Tech dominated the financial headlines for weeks. The market reacted with unprecedented enthusiasm to the union of the two companies, but behind the scenes an even more significant transformation was taking place. Alexandra woke up in her new apartment in San Francisco, the first rays of the Bay sun illuminating the room through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The ring on her finger caught the morning light, reminding her that the last few months hadn't just been an elaborate dream. Meeting in an hour, Nathan murmured sleepily beside her, reaching for his phone on the bedside table. The board wants to discuss the implementation of Project Phoenix in the international subsidiaries. The transition hadn't been easy, merging two distinct corporate cultures, managing teams that were once competitors, and above all, rebuilding lost trust required more than simple business strategies. It required heart. In their new joint headquarters located in a modernist building in downtown San Francisco, Alexander and Nathan had created something unique, an environment where innovation and humanity went hand in hand. Wells Technologies employees, initially skeptical, quickly realized that they were not being absorbed, but reborn along with the company. Miss Wells, Mia interrupted her thoughts, entering the conference room where Alexandra was reviewing reports. Rachel needs your approval for the new technological development program. The Phoenix project had evolved beyond initial expectations. The combination of Nathan's innovative vision and Alexander's management experience created a synergy that revolutionized the market, but the real success wasn't in the impressive figures or the laudatory headlines. Remember our first project together? Nathan asked over a late lunch on the building's rooftop that pattern recognition software that everyone said was impossible. Alexander smiled, recalling the endless nights of programming, the heated discussions about algorithms, and the celebrations when they finally got it to work. You always believed it was possible even when I doubted it, just as I've always believed in us, he replied, his eyes reflecting the same determined sparkle that had won her over years ago, even in the most difficult times. The afternoon brought an unexpected visit. Richard Morrison, now cooperating with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence, had sent a letter. Alexandra hesitated before opening the envelope, feeling Nathan's silent support at her side. He confesses everything, she murmured, reading the handwritten pages, not just the financial scheme, but how he manipulated evidence and people to separate us. The past can't be changed, Nathan replied softly, but it can teach us how to build a better future. And that was exactly what they were doing. The new company wasn't just a technological powerhouse. It was an example of how second chances, when taken wisely and humbly, could turn failures into triumphs. At the launch party for the first product developed jointly by the unified teams, Alexandra watched with pride as employees who had previously barely spoken to each other now collaborated enthusiastically. Nathan, leading a demonstration of the new augmented reality system, seemed livelier than ever. You turned revenge into redemption, she commented later when they were alone in their shared office. How did you do it? Nathan pulled her close, his fingers entwined in hers. I realized that there was something more important than pride or revenge. Love for you, for what we've built together, for what we can still build. The sun was setting over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected in the windows of the skyscrapers. On Alexander's desk, an old photo from the opening of Wells Technologies, now shared space with a more recent one, her and Nathan on the day the merger was announced, genuine smiles lighting up their faces. You know what impresses me the most? Rachel commented during a strategy meeting. How you turned a story that could have been about revenge into a lesson about forgiveness and growth. And it was true. Every decision, every project, every small step they took together was not just about recovering what they had lost, but about building something new and better. Trust, once broken, was now stronger for having been tested and rebuilt. The ring on Alexandra's finger sparkled as she typed in the final code for the new project they were working on. Nathan, watching her from the office door, smiled as he recognized the familiar determination in her eyes. Ready for another adventure? He asked, holding out his hand to her. Alexandra saved the file and stood up, entwining her fingers in his. With you always. The future stretched out before them, no longer as a threat of revenge or a weight of regrets, but as a promise of infinite possibilities. Wells Infinity, as the press had dubbed the merged company, was more than a technological empire. It was a testament that love, when true, could overcome even the deepest wounds. As they walked together to yet another meeting, Alexandra realized that sometimes you have to lose everything to find something even more valuable. Nathan had turned his quest for revenge into a journey of redemption, and in the process, they hadn't just saved their company, they had saved each other. The city continued its frenetic pace outside, but inside those glass and steel walls, a story of love and redemption had found its true home, and that perhaps was the biggest breakthrough of all.